All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
Violet, graphic designer. The scent of stale, lavender, and regret. That's what I remember about that room. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a neutral ground where our love went to be resuscitated by a professional. Dr. Evans, with her kind eyes and perpetually nodding head, sat in an oversized armchair that seemed to swallow her whole. Christopher was to my left, a foot of expensive beige upholstery between us, a chasm of 1,000 unsaid things. He was wearing the blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday, the one that brought out the specks of gray in his eyes. He looked the part of the contrite husband. He'd been looking the part for 6 weeks. "Violet," Dr. Evans began, her voice a calibrated instrument of calm, "last session, you mentioned feeling a distance. A shift in intimacy. Can you elaborate on what that feels like for you?" I stared at my hands, at the simple platinum band on my finger. 11 years. It felt like a landmark and a life sentence all at once. "It feels like I'm living with a ghost," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "A very polite, very helpful ghost who remembers to take out the trash but has forgotten my language. He's there, but the frequency he's on, I can't tune into it anymore." Christopher shifted. I saw the movement from the corner of my eye, a slight stiffening of his shoulders. "I'm trying, Vi," he said, the familiar defensiveness creeping into his tone. "I'm here, aren't I? I'm doing the work." "The work," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "What work is that, Chris?" "The work of remembering to text me when you'll be late? The work of sitting in this room for 50 minutes a week?" I finally turned to look at him. His jaw was tight. "The intimacy isn't just gone from the bedroom. It's gone from the kitchen. From the way you used to look at me when I was designing something, with that genuine interest. Now you just glance at my screen and ask what's for dinner." "That's not fair," he protested, his eyes flicking towards Dr. Evans, seeking an ally. "I'm under a lot of pressure at the firm. The Henderson account is a nightmare, you know that." And I did know. I knew all about the Henderson account. I'd listened to the nightly debriefs, had sympathized with the late nights, had even designed a few mock-up presentations for him pro bono, because that's what you do for your husband. You pour your creativity into his black hole of a project because his success is your success, or so I'd thought. "Let's bring the focus back to Violet's feeling," Dr. Evans interjected gently. "Christopher, when Violet says she feels you're on a different frequency, what comes up for you?" He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of frustration I knew so well. "I don't know, I'm tired, I'm distracted. It's not intentional." His phone, which he had placed face down on the cushion between us, vibrated with a low hum. It was a sound I'd become hyper-aware of. The phantom vibrations I'd feel in the dead of night, the way he'd snatch it up the second a notification lit up the screen. My own phone was in my purse on silent, a tool for my work, for connection. His phone had become a vault, a sealed chamber he carried with him everywhere, even into the shower. The flinch was what did it. The memory of it, sharp and sudden as a needle. 3 days ago, I'd reached for his phone to move it off the kitchen counter so I could wipe the surface. My fingers had barely grazed the cool glass of the screen when he jerked it away, a spasmodic, involuntary reaction, like I'd touched a hot stove. His eyes had widened for a fraction of a second, a deer in the headlights, before the mask of annoyance slid back into place. "Sorry," he'd mumbled. "Thought it was going to fall." It was a lie. I'd felt the truth of it in the pit of my stomach, a cold, heavy stone. Now, in this room smelling of fake calm and real despair, that stone was growing, pressing against my diaphragm, making it hard to breathe. The phone vibrated again. This time, he didn't move. He ignored it, his focus fixed on Dr. Evans. "It's just work," he said, but his voice was a fraction too high. And in that moment, something in me broke open. It wasn't a loud break. It was a silent, fundamental shattering, like a sheet of glass in a vacuum. The politeness, the therapy speak, the 11 years of shared history, it all fell away, leaving only a raw, terrifying clarity. "Give me your phone," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's thick atmosphere like a shard of ice. Christopher blinked. "What? Give me your phone, right now." Dr. Evans leaned forward. "Violet, perhaps this isn't the best." "No." I didn't look away from him. "It's the perfect time. We're here to be honest, right? To bridge the distance. So let's bridge it." Show me what's so important that it vibrates on the couch during our session to save our marriage. Show me the Henderson account. His face paled. The confident architect, the man who could command a room of investors, looked like a scared boy. Violet, don't do this, not here. Why not here? I asked, the calm in my voice terrifying even to me. We're safe. Dr. Evans is here to mediate. Whatever it is, we can process it together. That's the point, isn't it? He didn't move. His hand, which had been resting on his knee, curled into a fist. The phone vibrated a third time, insistent, a tiny angry bee against the fabric. Each buzz was a nail in the coffin of our life together. I moved faster than I thought I could. My hand darted out, not for the phone, but for his wrist. My fingers closed around it, feeling the rapid, rabbit-like pulse beneath his skin. He flinched again, the exact same flinch. And I knew. The world slowed, crystallizing into hyper-detailed fragments. The faint pattern of the rug, a swirl of beige and brown that suddenly looked like a screaming face. The dust motes dancing in a sliver of afternoon light cutting through the blinds. The quick, almost imperceptible intake of breath from Dr. Evans. The sheen of sweat on Christopher's upper lip. My grip on his wrist tightened. Who is she? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, a verdict. His eyes met mine, and for a second I saw it all, the guilt, the fear, the sheer panic of being caught. Then the shutters came down. His face went blank, a carefully constructed facade of wounded pride. I don't know what you're talking about. You're being paranoid. The word was a slap. Paranoid. The classic dismissal, the gaslighter's favorite tool. But the stone in my gut was now a diamond, hard and brilliant with certainty. It's not the Henderson account, is it? I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. It's a her. Is it Sarah, from the marketing team? The one with the laugh you said was infectious. His silence was more confirmation than any word could ever be. It was a void, an abyss that swallowed 11 years of my life whole. The shared jokes, the lazy Sundays, the way he held my hand during his father's funeral, the dream of a house in the mountains we'd sketched on napkins. It all tumbled into that abyss, rendered meaningless. I let go of his wrist as if burned. I stood up. The room seemed to tilt. I was Violet, a 37-year-old graphic designer from Colorado, and my husband was a cliché. My husband was a liar. My husband had been fucking a colleague and lying to my face in a therapist's office. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked at Dr. Evans, whose professionally neutral expression was now etched with genuine pity. I looked at Christopher, who wouldn't meet my gaze, studying the pattern on the rug as if it held the secrets of the universe. And then I walked out. I left my purse, my jacket, my life in that room. I walked out of the office, into the blinding Colorado sun, and the world had not ended. The cars still drove down the street. The leaves on the aspens were still turning a brilliant, fiery gold. The world was exactly the same, but I was utterly, irrevocably new. I was a woman who had been built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in. All that was left was the erosion, and the terrifying, vast emptiness of what came next. The world outside Dr. Evans' office was unbearably loud. The sun was too bright, the colors too vivid. The golden leaves on the aspens weren't just golden, they were screaming a final, glorious ode to a summer I would never get back. Each car that whooshed past was a violation of the silence I craved, the silence I needed to process the nuclear bomb that had just detonated in the center of my life. I walked. I didn't know where I was going. My purse, my phone, my keys, all of it was back in that room with that man. The man whose wrist I had gripped, whose pulse I had felt racing with lies. I was untethered, a ghost in my own life. People passed me on the sidewalk, their faces blurred smears of purpose and normalcy. A woman laughed into her phone, a sound so carefree it felt like an personal insult. A couple held hands, their fingers intertwined, and I felt a physical nausea rise in my throat. My mind was a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a different memory, now twisted and grotesque. Christopher, laughing as he tried to assemble IKEA furniture, swearing in Swedish. Christopher, holding me in the hospital waiting room when we found out the last round of IVF had failed, his tears soaking into my hair. Christopher, just 2 weeks ago, telling me over dinner he'd barely touched that I was the most beautiful woman he knew. Had he looked me in the eye when he said it? I couldn't remember. The memory was now tainted, the colors running, the truth bleeding through the veneer. I found myself outside a small, trendy hair salon called Sheer Alchemy. The name was stupid, the kind of place I'd usually roll my eyes at. But the window display was clean, modern, and the woman inside, with hair the color of a silver galaxy, was meticulously folding towels. She looked up, caught my eye through the glass. My reflection superimposed on hers. A 37-year-old woman with long, honey-brown hair Christopher had always loved, had woven his fingers through 1,000 times, wearing a face of absolute, utter devastation. Something clicked into place. A cold, hard certainty. I pushed the door open. A bell chimed, a cheerful, innocent sound. The woman Ava, according to her name tag, smiled. "Hi there, do you have an appointment?" I couldn't form words. I just stood there, my breath catching in my lungs. I must have looked like a madwoman. My eyes were dry, wide, burning with unshed tears. My hands were shaking. Ava's professional smile softened into something more genuine, more concerned. "Honey, are you okay?" I found my voice, but it didn't sound like mine. It was raw, scraped hollow. "I need you to cut it all off." Her gaze flickered to my hair, then back to my face. "A trim. Some layers." "No," the word was final. "All of it, and I want you to dye it something, not this." I saw the understanding dawn in her eyes. She'd seen this before. The woman on the brink. The woman using her own hair as a sacrificial offering to the gods of a new life. She nodded slowly, her expression turning solemn, almost priestly. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair. "Let's talk." An hour later, I was trapped in the cape, staring at my own terrified eyes in the mirror. My hair, my crown, my security blanket was about to be sheared. Ava held up the electric clippers. "Last chance. Do it." The buzz was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It vibrated through the leather of the chair, up my spine, into my teeth. I watched, mesmerized, as the first chunk of honey brown fell to the floor, a dead thing. Then another, and another. The physical weight on my head lessened with each pass of the clippers, but an emotional weight I hadn't even known I was carrying began to lift. It was a destruction. A deliberate, violent erasure of the woman I had been. The woman who was loved by Christopher. The woman who believed his lies. The woman whose hair he would twist around his finger while we watched TV. Tears finally came then. Not loud, racking sobs, but a silent, steady stream that carved hot paths down my cheeks. I didn't try to stop them. Ava worked in silence, her movements efficient and gentle. She didn't offer platitudes. She was my accomplice in this act of self-immolation. When the buzzing stopped, I was a punk rock pixie, all sharp angles and exposed scalp. I looked like a stranger. A fierce, vulnerable stranger. I barely recognized myself. "Now for the color," Ava said, her voice soft. "What are we thinking?" I looked at the palette of possibilities. Brunettes, blondes, reds, they all felt like variations on a theme I was done with. My eyes landed on a swatch of color so deep, so vibrant it was almost black, but with a hidden fire. It was called Vampire's Kiss, a deep blood wine red. "That," I said, pointing. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Excellent choice." The process of dyeing was a meditation. The smell of chemicals, the foils glinting in the light, the warmth of the processing cap, it was alchemy. I was being stripped down and rebuilt, molecule by molecule. I closed my eyes and let the silence inside me grow. The image of Christopher's panicked face, the vibration of his phone, the feel of his wrist. I packed it all into a mental box and shoved it into the deepest, darkest corner of my mind. I would deal with it later. Now, I was just a canvas. When Ava rinsed me out, blow-dried and styled the new me, I could barely breathe. The woman in the mirror was a revelation. The short cut sharpened my cheekbones, made my green eyes look huge and haunted. The red was not a color of passion, it was a color of warning, a danger sign. It was the color of a stop sign, of arterial blood, of a phoenix's heart. It was the absolute antithesis of the soft, honey-brown wife Christopher had betrayed. I don't look like me," I whispered. "You look like the version of you that was always waiting to get out," Ava corrected gently. "Now, what's the plan?" The plan? I had no plan. I had no home, no phone, no money. I was a newly forged weapon with no target. "I need to go home," I said, the words tasting foreign. Home was no longer home. It was a crime scene. Ava, saint that she was, lent me her phone. I couldn't remember Christopher's number. My own number, yes. My best friend Maya's number was etched into my memory from childhood. I called her, my voice trembling as I explained the bare minimum. He cheated. I'm at a salon. I have no stuff. Can you come? 20 minutes later, Maya's beat-up Jeep screeched to a halt outside the salon. She burst in, her face a storm of fury and concern. She saw me, did a double take so violent I thought she'd get whiplash, and then her eyes filled with tears. Holy shit, Vi, she breathed, walking over and cupping my face. You look incredible and terrifying. What happened? The whole story tumbled out in the Jeep, punctuated by her furious swearing. That son of a bitch. In therapy, I'm going to castrate him with a rusty spoon. She took me to her apartment, a cluttered, cozy haven that smelled of incense and cat. It was the antithesis of my sterile, modern condo that Christopher and I had designed. It was alive. She fed me tea laced with a generous shot of whiskey, and I finally, fully broke down. The sobs were ugly, heaving things that tore from my chest. I mourned. I mourned the death of my marriage, the death of my future, the death of the woman I thought I was. The next few days were a blur of logistical nightmares. Maya took me to get a new phone and a new debit card. I couldn't face the condo. Christopher had blown up my phone, first with frantic calls, then with angry texts, then with pleading ones. Violet, please, we can talk about this. It was a mistake. You can't just disappear. I love you. I blocked his number. The silence was my sanctuary. But the silence in Maya's apartment during the day, when she was at work, was different. It was heavy, filled with the ghosts of what I'd lost. The grief was a physical presence, a thick, toxic fog I couldn't escape. I would sit for hours, staring at the wall, the image of that therapy room playing on a loop behind my eyes. One afternoon, trapped in the fog, I found myself wandering into Maya's spare room, which she used as a storage/jam space. In the corner, leaning against a stack of amplifiers, was an electric guitar. A beautiful, cherry-red Fender Stratocaster. It was dusty, but it looked powerful. I remembered my randomized, almost laughable form of self-development, learning to play the electric guitar at full volume. It had seemed abstract, a line in a technical document. Now it felt like a prophecy. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. The wood was smooth and cool. I slung the strap over my shoulder, the weight a comforting anchor. I found the amplifier, a small black star, and plugged the guitar in, my hands trembling. I turned the volume knob all the way to 10. I didn't know a single chord. I didn't know how to tune it. I didn't care. I placed my fingers randomly on the fretboard and strummed. The sound that erupted from the amplifier was monstrous. It was a roar of pure, unfiltered noise. A cacophony of distortion and feedback that shook the windows and vibrated in my bones. It was the sound of my shattered heart, my rage, my betrayal, my grief. It was ugly. It was brutal. It was honest. I did it again. And again. I slammed my palm against the strings, creating a percussive, jarring thud. I bent the neck, creating a wail that sounded like a dying animal. I wasn't playing music. I was exorcising demons. I was screaming without using my voice. The volume was so loud it physically pushed the air around me. It filled the empty spaces in the room and in my soul. Tears streamed down my face again, but this time they were hot tears of catharsis. I played my pain, my confusion, my newfound, terrifying freedom. I played until my fingers were raw and the cat was hiding under the bed. When I finally put the guitar down, the silence that rushed back in was different. It was no longer heavy. It was clean. It was the silence after a storm. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the TV. The woman with the vampire red hair and raw fingertips stared back, her eyes still haunted, but now with a glint of something else. Something hard, something resilient. Christopher had tried to erase me, so I had erased myself first. And from the blank canvas, a new Violet was being drawn in bold, bloody red lines and the feedback wail of an electric guitar. The old Violet was gone. I didn't know who this new one was yet, but I knew she was louder. And she was just beginning to learn how to make noise. The world had not stopped. Bills needed to be paid. My studio, a rented space in a converted brick warehouse in the Rhino Art District, was still mine, but the mortgage on the condo Christopher and I shared was a joint noose. The first email I sent, from my new, sterile phone, was to my landlord, explaining a personal emergency, and paying the next 3 months' rent in advance from the savings account I'd hastily separated. The second was to my divorce lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Brenda who had a voice that could etch glass and a reputation for eviscerating lying husbands. The third was the hardest. It was to the architectural firm of Sterling and Grove, Christopher's firm. For the past 18 months, I had been their sole freelance graphic designer. I'd rebranded their entire identity: logo, website, stationery, presentation templates. I knew the fonts, the color palettes, the very aesthetic of their success intimately. It was my work I was proud of, work that now felt like a collaboration with the enemy. The project on the table was a new, high-profile community center. My task was the initial concept branding and the digital presentation for the client pitch. It was a big job, a job I needed, both financially and for my professional soul. But the thought of opening the files, of seeing Christopher's name in the email chains, of designing something beautiful for a firm that housed the woman he'd betrayed me with, it made my stomach roil. I had to go in. The project lead, a senior partner named Robert Grove, had requested an in-person meeting to align the creative vision with the architectural schematics. My request to do it over Zoom was politely but firmly denied. "The prints are too large, Violet. We need to spread them out, see the whole picture." So I went, dressed in my armor, black, tailored trousers, a simple white silk shell, and a blazer that felt like a suit of mail. My vampire red hair was slicked back, a stark flag of my new identity. I wore boots with a slight heel, not for elegance, but for the authoritative click-clack they made on polished concrete. I wanted to sound like I was arriving for a conquest, not a surrender. The reception area of Sterling and Grove was a monument to cool, masculine efficiency: exposed ductwork, polished concrete floors, furniture in shades of gray and steel. It was a space I had helped design the branding for, and now it felt like a beautifully designed trap. The receptionist, a young man I didn't recognize, smiled brightly. "Violet Hayes for Robert Grove," I said, my voice thankfully steady. "Of course, he's in the main conference room, you know the way." I did. I walked down the familiar corridor, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Every door I passed felt like a threat. Would Christopher be behind one? Would she? I had no idea what she looked like, this female colleague. Was she young? Blonde? Did she have an infectious laugh? My imagination had painted 1,000 cruel portraits. I pushed open the heavy door to the conference room. Robert Grove, a man in his late 50s with a kind face and a perpetually worried expression, stood over a massive table covered in blueprints. He looked up and did a barely perceptible double-take at my hair, but his professionalism was impeccable. "Violet, thank you for coming in. You look refreshed." It was a generous word. I felt like a piece of shrapnel. "Robert," I nodded, my eyes scanning the room. It was just us. The tension in my shoulders eased a fraction. "We have the initial schematics from the lead architect on the project. He'll be joining us in a moment to walk us through the spatial flow. It's crucial your branding captures the essence of the building's intent." "Of course," I said, unrolling my own portfolio of mood boards and digital mock-ups. "The concept I'm developing revolves around community convergence, using overlapping, transparent shapes and a warm, earthy palette to suggest connection and accessibility." "Excellent, excellent," Robert murmured, his eyes on the blueprints. "The architect has done a remarkable job with the light wells and the central atrium. It's really the heart of the speak of the devil." The conference room door opened again. I didn't look up, my focus pretended on aligning my color swatches with a line on the blueprint. "Liam, perfect timing. This is Violet Hayes, our brilliant graphic designer. Violet, this is Liam Walker, the lead architect on the community center project. He's the genius behind these drawings." A name I didn't recognize, not a Sterling and Grove employee, a freelance architect like me. The air shifted slightly. I looked up. And the world, for the second time in a month, tilted on its axis, but this time not into an abyss, into possibility. Liam Walker was not what I expected. He wasn't the polished, sleek-haired archetype that populated Sterling and Grove. He was probably in his early 40s, with the kind of face that spoke of time spent outdoors. Fine lines around his eyes from squinting, a light weathering to his skin. His hair was a messy, dark brown, streaked with gray, and looked like he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. He wore dark jeans, boots that had seen actual use, and a simple, well-worn charcoal Henley under a blazer. He looked solid, grounded. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue-gray, met mine, and they held a quiet, assessing intelligence. They didn't flicker with pity or curiosity about my hair. They just saw me. "Violet," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. It was a voice that didn't need to raise itself to be heard. "It's a pleasure. I've admired your work for Sterling and Grove for a while." He extended a hand. His fingers were long, capable, with a faint tracing of calluses. A draftsman's hand, a builder's hand. When I took it, his grip was firm, warm, and devoid of the frantic energy I was drowning in. It felt like grabbing a rock in a raging river. "The pleasure is mine," I managed, my own voice sounding thin in comparison. "The schematics are beautiful." And they were. The lines were fluid, organic, yet structurally sound. It was a building designed for people, not for prestige. "For the people who'll use it, I hope," he said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. He released my hand and moved to the head of the table, his presence immediately commanding the space without arrogance. For the next hour, he walked us through his vision. He spoke not in jargon, but in poetry. The atrium wasn't just an atrium, it was a communal hearth. The light wells were designed to track the sun's journey, painting the walls with time. He talked about the acoustics, the texture of the materials, the way the space would feel to a child running through it, to an elderly person sitting in a sunbeam. I listened, rapt. This was more than architecture, it was empathy rendered in concrete and glass. My ideas, which had felt clinical and forced before, suddenly ignited. I saw how my community convergence concept could mirror the physical flow of his spaces. I started sketching on a trace paper overlay, my pen flying. "Here," I said, excitement cutting through my guardedness for the first time in weeks. "If the main stairwell is the primary circulation spine, what if the branding used this same undulating line as a repeating motif? A literal and visual convergence." Liam looked from my sketch to the blueprint, then back to my face. His blue-gray eyes gleamed with approval. "Yes, exactly that, you see it." In that moment, it was just the two of us, speaking a shared language of line and form. Robert Grove, sensing the creative synergy, quietly excused himself to take a call. The moment the door shut, the energy in the room shifted again. It was more intimate, more charged. "Can I ask you a question?" Liam said, leaning against the table, his arms crossed. "Of course." He gestured vaguely towards my head with a smile. "The hair. Is it a don't mess with me signal or a I'm reinventing myself statement?" The bluntness of the question should have offended me. Instead, it was a relief. He wasn't tiptoeing. "Both," I said, matching his directness. "Mostly the latter," he nodded slowly. "I get that. After my divorce, I grew a beard. My ex-wife hated facial hair. It was stupidly symbolic, but it felt necessary." The casual mention of a shared experience, a shared pain, was like a life raft tossed into my stormy sea. I didn't have to explain. He just knew. The meeting ran long. "Can I get you a coffee?" he asked, pushing off the table. "I know Robert keeps a truly abysmal pod machine in the break room, but I know a place around the corner that does a proper Americano." My first instinct was to refuse, to retreat, but the new Violet, the one with red hair and raw fingertips, was curious. An Americano sounds human. The coffee shop was everything Sterling and Grove was not. Warm, slightly shabby, filled with the rich, earthy scent of real beans. We found a small table in the corner. The simple normalcy of the act, getting coffee with a colleague, felt profoundly alien. "So, the community center," I began, clutching at the safety of professional topics. "Later," he said, waving a hand. "First, coffee, and then you can tell me what kind of music you play so loud it requires a new haircut." I stared at him, stunned. "How did you?" He gave a small, sheepish shrug. "The tips of the fingers on your left hand. There's a faint redness, a freshness, new calluses, guitar. And someone who makes a change that dramatic," he nodded at my hair, "is usually making noise in other areas of their life too." His observation was so acute, so unexpected, it stole my breath. Christopher had never noticed anything so subtle about me in 11 years. This man had decoded a chapter of my life from a glance at my hands over a conference table. "I'm learning," I admitted, looking down at my Americano. "It's mostly noise right now, cathartic noise." "The best kind," he said, and took a sip of his coffee. "I remember how you take yours, by the way, from the Sterling and Grove Christmas party last year. You were in a deep debate with Robert about serif versus sans serif fonts, and you doctored your coffee while talking. One sugar, no cream. You looked like you were conducting an orchestra." He remembered, from a fleeting moment a year ago. He remembers how she takes her coffee. The randomized parameter from my technical assignment echoed in my mind, but it felt nothing like a parameter now. It felt like a thread of fate, thin and strong, pulling taut between us. I looked at him, really looked at him. At the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the lack of pretense, the sheer, solid presence of him. The diamond of certainty that had formed in my gut the day I discovered Christopher's betrayal began to glow with a different kind of heat. Not the heat of rage, but the slow, steady warmth of a spark catching kindling. This wasn't a romance. It was far too soon for that. This was a recognition. The recognition of one recently broken person seeing another, not to lean on, but to acknowledge the breaking and to see the strength in the repaired seams. We talked for an hour. Not about work, not really. We talked about the best hiking trails near Boulder, about the terrible movies we both secretly loved, about the frustration of IKEA instructions and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. We talked about everything and nothing, and for one precious, stolen hour, I didn't think about Christopher. I didn't feel the gaping hole he'd left in my life. I felt full, seen, heard. Walking back to my studio, the Colorado air felt crisper, the sky a deeper blue. The grief was still there, a dormant beast in my chest. The anger was still a low simmer. But layered over it was something new, something fragile but potent: anticipation. I had walked into Sterling and Grove fearing a confrontation with my past. I had walked out with a blueprint for a possible future. It wasn't a blueprint for a building, or even for a relationship. It was a blueprint for me. And for the first time since the scent of stale lavender and regret, the lines looked clean, the structure looked sound, and the light looked promising. The new apartment was a blank slate in every sense of the word. A one-bedroom box on the third floor of a modern building in Lohi, with pristine white walls, gray vinyl flooring, and a silence so profound it echoed. I'd rented it furnished, but the furniture was generic, soulless: a beige couch, a glass coffee table, a bed frame that felt like it belonged in a hotel room. It was a place to exist, not to live. And after a month of sleeping on Maya's couch, surrounded by the comforting chaos of her life, the sterile quiet of my own space was deafening. The first boxes I brought over were my design books, my iMac, and my electric guitar. They were the three pillars of my new identity: the professional, the creative, and the cathartic. Setting them up in the small second bedroom that would serve as my studio was an act of reclamation. But it was the fourth box, the one labeled Bedroom MISC, that broke me. It was full of the detritus of a shared life. A photo album I couldn't bring myself to open. A set of his and hers coffee mugs I'd packed by mistake. A sweater of Christopher's that still smelled faintly of his cologne. I sat on the floor of the empty bedroom, the cardboard digging into my knees, and felt the grief rise like a tide, threatening to pull me under. The cathartic rage of the guitar, the intellectual spark with Liam, it all felt like a distant dream here, in this sterile box that was supposed to be my home. I couldn't let the silence win. I couldn't let this space be defined by absence. The randomized parameter from my file flashed in my mind, building furniture together with comical instructions. There was no together, not yet, maybe not ever. But there was building, and there were most certainly comical instructions. I drove to IKEA. The store was a temple of potential normalcy, a maze of staged room sets that promised a perfect, affordable life. I felt a wave of cynicism, so strong it nearly knocked me over. But I pushed my giant yellow cart forward with a grim determination. I bypassed the cozy living rooms and the sleek kitchens. I went straight to the bedroom section and found the biggest, most complicated-looking dresser I could find. A massive, 6-drawer behemoth called the HOPN. It was a statement piece. It would not be ignored. And assembling it would require every ounce of my focus, leaving no room for tears. Back in my apartment, I laid out the pieces on the floor of my bedroom. The long planks of particle board, the bags of screws and cam locks, the little L-shaped Allen wrench that felt like a cruel joke. The instructions were, as predicted, a masterpiece of minimalist absurdity. A series of pictograms featuring a blissfully smiling, genderless stick figure, accomplishing miraculous feats of engineering with effortless grace. "Okay, Violet," I muttered to the empty room. "Let's see what you're made of." For the first hour, it was a satisfying, if tedious, puzzle. I identified the pieces, sorted the hardware. I felt a surge of pride as I attached the first side panel to the base. I was building something, with my own two hands. I wasn't just destroying my old life. I was constructing a new one cam lock at a time. Then I reached step 8. The diagram showed the stick figure effortlessly sliding the pre-assembled drawer rails into the side panels. In reality, the rails were flimsy, the pre-drilled holes seemed misaligned, and the tiny screws refused to bite into the particle board without stripping. I wrestled with the first rail for 20 minutes, my hands growing slick with sweat, my frustration mounting. The second rail was worse. I pushed too hard, and the entire side panel I'd so carefully attached earlier splintered with a sickening crack. I stared at the damage, a long, ugly split in the faux wood veneer. It was just a dresser, a stupid, mass-produced piece of furniture. But in that moment, it was everything. It was my marriage, a beautiful facade that had shattered under pressure. It was my life, a carefully constructed thing now broken and irreparable. The dam broke. Hot, angry tears of frustration welled in my eyes. I let out a guttural scream of pure rage and kicked the offending piece of wood. It skittered across the floor, taking a bag of screws with it. This was a mistake. I was a failure. I couldn't even build a fucking dresser. How was I supposed to build a new life? My phone buzzed on the floor, a text from Liam. We'd exchanged numbers after the coffee meeting, under the professional pretext of the community center project. The messages had started work-related, but had slowly, subtly evolved. He'd sent me a photo of a horribly designed building he'd seen, captioned "Graphic Design Nightmare, Your Professional Opinion." I'd sent him a snippet of a marginally less chaotic guitar riff. It was a slow, careful dance. The text read, "How's the Fortress of Solitude? Need an emergency delivery of Swedish meatballs." The timing was so perfect it was jarring. A laugh bubbled up through my tears, a wet, choked sound. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing sawdust and tears across my cheek. I typed back, my thumbs clumsy. "I'm declaring war on a dresser named HOPEN. It's winning." His response was immediate. "The Hopen? A formidable foe. Its neutral evil alignment is often underestimated. Need backup? I'm actually just around the corner, picking up some drafting supplies." I hesitated. Letting him into this space, into my failure, felt dangerously vulnerable. This apartment was my raw, unfinished self. The red hair was a flag. This was the battlefield. But the thought of being alone with the splintered corpse of the Hopen was infinitely worse. "Backup appreciated," I typed before I could lose my nerve. Code red, "Bring more Allen wrenches." And coffee. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Liam standing there, holding 2 cardboard cups of coffee and a small, serious-looking toolkit, not the flimsy plastic kind IKEA provided. He was wearing a worn-out band t-shirt and jeans, and he looked more like a rock climber than an architect. His eyes went from my tear-streaked face to the carnage of wood and screws spread across my bedroom floor. "Rough day at the office," he said, his voice devoid of pity, full of simple understanding. "The worst," I croaked, stepping aside to let him in. He didn't say, "Oh, you poor thing." He didn't try to hug me. He walked into the bedroom, set the coffees down on the windowsill, and surveyed the battlefield with a critical eye. He picked up the splintered side panel. "Ah, the classic Hopen hull breach. A common tactical error." He knelt down, opening his toolkit. "We have 2 options. We can try to glue and clamp this, but the structural integrity is compromised. Or we can use a bracket here, on the inside, to reinforce it. It won't be pretty, but it'll be strong, it'll hold." I stared at him. He diagnosed the problem and offered 2 practical solutions in under 10 seconds. No drama, no judgment, just a fix. "The bracket," I said. "I don't care about pretty, I just want it to hold." He nodded. "Good choice." For the next 2 hours, we worked. He handled the surgery on the broken panel with a quiet competence that was mesmerizing. He showed me how to pre-drill holes for the screws to prevent stripping, how to use a rubber mallet to gently persuade stubborn pieces into place. It wasn't him taking over. It was him teaching, guiding. I was still the one turning the screws, sliding in the drawers. We were a team. The conversation was easy, flowing around the task. He told me about his first solo project, a treehouse for his nephew that collapsed 5 minutes after completion. I told him about the time I accidentally designed an entire brochure in the wrong color profile, printing 10,000 copies in a lurid neon green. We talked about our favorite, obscure spot in Rocky Mountain National Park, and it turned out we both loved the same forgot lake off the beaten path. The air filled with the scent of coffee and fresh wood. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting a warm golden rectangle on the floor. The silence that had felt so oppressive earlier was now a comfortable, shared quiet, punctuated by the soft tap of the mallet and the sound of our breathing. When we slid the last drawer into its perfectly aligned runner, a sense of profound accomplishment washed over me. It was just a dresser, but it was my dresser, and we had built it, together. We stood back, admiring our work. It was lopsided. The bracket was visible on the inside. One of the drawer handles was slightly crooked. It was imperfect. It was perfect. "To the hopin'," Liam said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "May it hold your socks for many years to come." I clinked my cup against his. "To the hopin'." He packed his tools, and I walked him to the door. The air between us was charged with something unspoken, something warm and terrifyingly hopeful. "Thank you, Liam," I said, my voice soft. "For everything." He smiled, that genuine, crinkle-eyed smile. "Anytime, Violet." He turned to go, then paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I almost forgot. I saw this and thought of you." He handed me a small, flat object wrapped in a paper napkin. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I unwrapped the napkin. Inside was a guitar pick, not a plain, standard one. This one was a deep, blood red, almost black, with a single, elegant white line slash across it. It was beautiful. It was a nod to my noise, to my rebellion, to the part of me that was still raw and learning. And tucked under the pick was a small, folded piece of paper. I opened it. It was a handwritten note in a clean, architectural script. "For the days the noise isn't enough." I held the pick and the note to my chest, sliding down the door to sit on the floor. I looked across the room at the crooked, sturdy, magnificent dresser. The silence in the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the memory of shared laughter, the ghost of a helpful presence, and the tangible, quiet promise of a future where broken things didn't have to be thrown away. They could be fixed, reinforced, made strong again in their own imperfect way. The red guitar pick became a talisman. I kept it on my desk, a small, waxy red shield against the ghosts of my past. The HOPEN dresser, standing proudly crooked in my bedroom, was a daily reminder that not all broken things were beyond repair. And the note, "For the days the noise isn't enough," was folded and tucked into my wallet, a secret warmth against the cold plastic of my new debit card. A week had passed since the great dresser battle. My communication with Liam had settled into a comfortable, daily rhythm. Texts about a frustrating client he was dealing with. Photos of a stunning sunset over the mountains from my studio window. A voice message he sent of a terrible, upbeat pop song he'd heard in a coffee shop, captioned, "This is the auditory equivalent of your HOPEN's instructions." I'd laughed, a real, unforced laugh that echoed in my sterile apartment and surprised me with its normalcy. But beneath the easy banter, a low current of anxiety hummed. This was the first man I was allowing past the fortified walls of my new life. Every friendly text felt like a step onto a frozen lake, testing the ice for cracks. Christopher had been my last first date. The rules of engagement had changed. I was no longer a hopeful young woman. I was a battlefield veteran, wary of landmines. The community center project was our official reason for contact, our safe ground. We had a meeting scheduled at his independent studio, a space he'd described as organized chaos. The professional in me was looking forward to seeing his natural habitat. The terrified, recently betrayed woman was panicking about what it meant. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, a parade of black and gray outfits feeling like different sets of armor. I finally chose a deep emerald green sweater and dark jeans. It was still me, but a version of me that acknowledged color could exist without Christopher. I applied my makeup with a careful hand, my reflection in the mirror showing a woman with sharp, red hair and eyes that were slowly losing their haunted look. His studio was in a converted garage behind a craftsman-style house in the Berkeley neighborhood. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and was immediately enveloped in a space that was the absolute antithesis of Sterling and Grove. It was warm, messy, and alive. Drafting tables were piled with rolls of tracing paper and blueprints. Models made of basswood and chipboard sat on every available surface. The walls were covered not with sterile corporate art, but with sketches, photographs of completed buildings, and a few abstract paintings that sang with color. The air smelled of coffee, sawdust, and ink. Liam was bent over a large table, meticulously adjusting the tiny trees on a topographic model. He was wearing headphones, his body swaying slightly to a beat I couldn't hear. He hadn't noticed me yet. I took the moment to watch him, this man who fixed broken dressers and remembered coffee orders. He looked in his element, completely absorbed, a creator in his sanctuary. He must have felt my gaze because he turned, a slow smile spreading across his face as he pulled off his headphones. "You found it." "I did. It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. This space was an extension of him, authentic, unpretentious, and deeply creative. "Chaos, you mean?" he chuckled, running a hand through his already messy hair. "But it's my chaos. Can I get you a coffee? I have a proper machine." None of that pod nonsense. My heart did a little flip. This was the moment. The moment the parameter from my file, that random, assigned trait, would either become beautifully, astonishingly real, or it would remain just a line of code. "That would be great," I said, my voice slightly tighter than I intended. He moved to a small kitchenette in the corner, fiddling with an expensive-looking espresso machine. I held my breath, the sounds of grinding beans filling the tense silence. He prepared 2 cups, his back to me. I watched his shoulders, the movement of his arms. He finished frothing the milk and turned, holding out a ceramic mug towards me. It was black, just black espresso with hot water. No sugar in sight. My usual order. The one he'd seen me make at a party over a year ago. He remembered. The simplicity of the act, the sheer, unassuming thoughtfulness of it, undid me more than any grand gesture ever could. Christopher had never, in 11 years, remembered how I took my coffee without being reminded. This man, from a single observation, had filed it away like a fundamental architectural principle. "1 sugar, no cream," he said, his blue-gray eyes meeting mine, a question in them. He was checking, making sure he'd gotten it right. I took the mug, my fingers brushing against his. The warmth seeped into my skin. "Perfect," I whispered, and the word carried the weight of more than just the coffee. We spent the next 2 hours immersed in the community center plans. The professional synergy was still there, electric and stimulating, but it was layered now with a new, personal frequency. Our conversations wove seamlessly from load-bearing walls to our favorite hiking trails, from color theory to our most embarrassing childhood memories. He told me about his divorce, not with bitterness, but with a quiet sadness and a hard-won wisdom. I found myself telling him about the IVF failures, the grief that had been a silent third partner in my marriage, a grief Christopher had never fully known how to share. He saw it as a failure, a project that didn't get built, I said, staring into my now empty coffee mug. He didn't understand that it was a loss we were supposed to mourn together. Liam was silent for a moment. A building that never gets built leaves an empty lot. That empty lot still has a presence. It still has to be acknowledged. His understanding was a balm. He didn't try to fix it. He just acknowledged the empty lot. As the afternoon light began to fade, painting long, golden shadows across his chaotic studio, we reached a natural lull. The work was done for the day. The pretext was gone. I started gathering my things, a nervous flutter returning to my stomach. This was the precipice. The moment where we would either say a polite professional goodbye or, "I was thinking," Liam said, leaning against his drafting table, his arms crossed. "This project, it feels like it deserves a celebration. Of the preliminary stages, I mean, would you like to get dinner?" There it was, the invitation, the step off the frozen lake and into the unknown waters. My every instinct screamed to retreat, to say I was busy, to hide in the safety of my sterile apartment with my guitar and my grief. I looked at him, at the sawdust on his jeans, at the honest expectation in his eyes, at the empty coffee mug that testified to a man who paid attention. I thought of the HOPEN dresser, standing strong with its hidden, reinforcing bracket. I wasn't that broken piece of particle board anymore. I was reinforced. But the fear was real, a cold knot in my chest. Liam, I took a shaky breath. I want to, I really do, but you have to understand I'm a mess. I'm held together with metaphorical brackets and guitar strings. It's not fair to drag anyone into that. He listened, his expression serious, not dismissive. He pushed off the table and took a step closer, not invading my space, but closing the distance just enough. Violet, he said, his voice low and steady. I'm not asking for a finished blueprint. I'm asking if I can look at the sketches. The metaphor, so perfectly tailored to our shared language, shattered my last defense. My eyes welled up, but this time, it wasn't from pain. It was from the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being truly seen and not being found wanting. I looked at the man who remembered my coffee, who fixed my dresser, who acknowledged my empty lots. The risk was terrifying. The potential for new pain was immense. But the promise of staying in the silent, safe emptiness of my own making was suddenly a far more frightening prospect. A slow, real smile spread across my face, feeling unfamiliar and wonderful on my lips. Okay, I said, my voice clear and sure. Okay, let's look at the sketches. The restaurant was called The Anchorage. It was a deliberate choice, Liam told me when he suggested it. Not too fancy, not too loud. Good food. A place you can actually hear yourself think. It was a statement that was so perfectly him, so considerate of the fragile state I was in, that it almost made me cancel. The pressure of being so perfectly understood was its own kind of terror. I spent the hour before the date in a state of near paralysis. I changed my outfit 3 times, each ensemble feeling like a costume. The emerald green from earlier felt too try-hard. Black felt like morning. I ended up in a simple, soft navy blue sweater and my best dark-wash jeans, a uniform of casual normalcy I did not feel. I stared at my reflection, the red-haired stranger, and tried to see the woman who was about to go on a date. All I saw was a collection of broken pieces hastily glued back together, threatening to shatter at the slightest touch. Maya, sensing my panic via a frantic series of texts, called me. Listen to me, Vi. He fixed your dresser. He remembers your coffee. He hasn't run screaming from the guitar noise or the red hair. This is not Christopher. This is Liam. Breathe, I breathed. The anchorage was, as promised, perfect. Warm lighting from reclaimed ship lanterns, walls adorned with nautical charts, and the low hum of conversation that felt like a protective bubble. Liam was already there, seated at a corner booth. He stood up as I approached, and my heart did that ridiculous little flip again. He was wearing a simple gray Henley that made his blue-gray eyes seem even more intense. You made it, he said, his smile warm and easy. I almost didn't, I admitted, sliding into the booth across from him. Honesty felt like the only currency I had left. I know, he replied, without a trace of judgment. I'm glad you did. The first half of the dinner was deceptively smooth. We talked about our work, about a new art installation downtown, about the absurdity of reality TV. The conversation flowed as easily as it had in his studio. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers, his gaze never wavering. He made me laugh, a real, deep-in-my-belly laugh, when he described a client who wanted a house built entirely in the shape of a pineapple. It's a bold choice, he deadpanned, very spiky. For stretches of minutes at a time, I forgot. I forgot the chasm of grief. I forgot the sting of betrayal. I was just Violet, having dinner with a charming, interesting man. It was a terrifying and exhilarating kind of amnesia. We ordered dessert, a shared slice of flourless chocolate cake that was so rich it was almost obscene. As we leaned in, our forks clinking in the middle of the plate, I felt a shift. The professional pretext was gone. The safety of group settings was gone. It was just us, in the warm, dim light, and the air was thick with unspoken things. That first day, at Sterling and Grove, I said, my voice quieter. When I walked in with this hair, you didn't even blink. He finished his bite of cake, considering his words. I did blink, actually, he said. I thought, there's a woman who's decided to stop being invisible. It was the most interesting thing I'd seen all week. His words landed not as flattery, but as recognition. He saw the intention behind the destruction. He saw the rebirth in the ruins. "I feel like I'm learning to walk again," I confessed, the words spilling out in a hushed rush. "And I'm terrified of falling. Or worse, of someone seeing me fall." Liam was silent for a moment, tracing the rim of his water glass. "After my marriage ended," he said, his voice low, "I didn't touch a drafting table for 3 months. I took a job as a trail guide in the San Juans. I just walked. I thought if I could just keep moving, I could outpace the feeling that I'd failed, that the entire blueprint of my life was flawed." He looked up at me. "You're not falling, Violet. You're on a new trail, and it's okay if the map is blank. It's okay to just walk." Tears pricked at my eyes. He was offering me a map of his own scars, and it was the most generous gift anyone had ever given me. In that moment, the last of my defenses crumbled. The warmth in the booth, the intimacy of his confession, the shared chocolate cake, it all coalesced into a powerful, magnetic pull. I felt myself leaning forward, infinitesimally. I saw his eyes drop to my lips, and he leaned in too. The space between us charged with the possibility of a first kiss, a silent, mutual agreement to step off the cliff together. And that's when my phone vibrated. It wasn't a normal buzz. It was the specific, jarring ringtone I had assigned to Christopher during our marriage and had never gotten around to change. A relic of a life I was trying to escape. It blared from my purse, a sonic scar tearing through the intimate silence of the booth. I flinched back as if electrocuted. The spell was shattered. The warm, safe bubble of the anchorage popped, and the cold, harsh reality of my unfinished business came flooding in. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, fumbling for my phone to silence it. My hands were shaking. The screen glowed with his name. Christopher. He hadn't called in weeks. Why now, why now? Liam's expression had shifted from soft intimacy to concerned watchfulness. "It's okay. You can take it if you need to." "No," I said, my voice too sharp. I declined the call and shoved the phone back into my purse, my heart hammering against my ribs. "No, I don't need to." But the damage was done. The ghost had been invited to the table. I could feel Christopher's presence between us, a cold, unwelcome draft. The easy comfort was gone. I was back in that therapy room, the scent of stale lavender in my nostrils, the feel of his panicked pulse under my fingers. "Violet!" Liam's voice was gentle, but it felt miles away. I can't do this," I whispered, the words tearing out of me. The walls were closing in. The laughter from the next table felt mocking. The chocolate cake tasted like ash. "I'm so sorry. I thought I could, but I can't." I was panicking. A full-blown, 5-alarm panic attack. The kind I hadn't had since the first week after the discovery. My breath hitched. The room started to swim. "Hey, look at me." Liam's voice was a calm, steady anchor in my swirling chaos. He didn't try to touch me. He didn't tell me to calm down. He just held my gaze with his blue-gray eyes a fixed point in the spinning room. "Breathe, just breathe, in through your nose, out through your mouth." I tried to mimic his rhythm, my breaths shuddering and uneven. "You're safe," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "You're at the anchorage. You're eating chocolate cake that costs way too much. And I am not going anywhere until you tell me you're okay. There is no pressure. There is no timeline. Do you understand?" His words were a life raft. I clung to them. I am not going anywhere. The exact opposite of what Christopher had done. He was offering stability in the midst of my storm. Tears finally overflowed, streaming down my cheeks silently. I was humiliated, laid bare in the worst possible way. "I'm ruining everything," I choked out. "You're not ruining anything," he said, his voice firm. "You're having a perfectly normal reaction to a perfectly abnormal situation. Your body is remembering before your mind has caught up. It's okay." He signaled for the check, his movements calm and efficient. He paid without a word, never once breaking his steady, reassuring eye contact with me. When the bill was settled, he slid out of his booth and came around to my side. "Come on," he said, not as a command, but as an invitation. "Let's get some air." I let him guide me out of the restaurant, his hand a gentle, non-possessive pressure on the small of my back. The cool night air hit my face like a blessing. We walked in silence for a block, my breathing slowly returning to normal, the sharp edges of the panic softening into a weary, shaky embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Liam," I said again, my voice small. "Stop apologizing," he said softly. "You have nothing to apologize for." We stopped under the glow of a street lamp. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling raw and exposed. He called, and it was like I was right back there, I explained, my voice trembling. The feeling of being so disposable, it just swallowed me whole. I know, he said, and he doesn't get to have that power anymore. But reclaiming that power isn't a switch you flip. It's a door you have to walk through, and sometimes you get stuck in the doorway. That's all that happened tonight. You got stuck in the doorway. I looked at him, really looked at him, there under the amber streetlight. He wasn't angry, he wasn't disappointed. He wasn't running. He was just there, solid, present, a human bulwark against the chaos of my past. I wanted to kiss you, I whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and liberating. A slow, understanding smile touched his lips. I know, I wanted to kiss you too, and we will, when the door isn't stuck. He walked me to my car, his presence a quiet shield. I felt the ghost of Christopher receding, banished by Liam's unshakable calm. The date had been a disaster, but it hadn't ended in disaster. It had ended in understanding. As I drove home, the city lights blurring past, I realized something. The fall I had been so terrified of, I had just fallen. In the middle of a restaurant, in front of the first man I had allowed myself to care for in over a decade, I had fallen apart completely. And he had been there to catch me. Not with dramatic heroics, but with a steady gaze and the simple, profound promise of staying. I walked into my silent apartment and went straight to the HOPN dresser. I ran my hand over its slightly crooked surface, over the bracket that held it together. It was strong. It held. I was like that dresser. I was imperfect. I had broken, but I was reinforced. And for the first time, I believed that I too could hold. The panic attack hadn't been a failure. It had been a test, and both of us had passed. The hangover from a panic attack is a peculiar thing. It's not the throbbing head of a wine hangover, but a deep, cellular exhaustion, as if every nerve ending has been fired upon and now lies smoking on a battlefield. The day after the non-kiss at the anchorage, I moved through my world in a fog of fragile shame. I replayed the moment 100 times, the warmth, the leaning in, the jarring ringtone, the sheer, unadulterated terror. I had shown him the raw, wiring under the floorboards of my psyche, and he had not fled. He had sat with me in the wreckage. That was the part my mind couldn't reconcile. His text came mid-morning. How's the air on your side of the doorway today? Simple, gentle, a check-in without pressure. It was a rope ladder thrown down into the pit of my embarrassment, offering a way out. Clearer, I typed back, my fingers still feeling clumsy. Thank you. For the air, and the cake, and everything else. Anytime. For the record, I'm still very much in favor of the kissing plan, when the door is good and unstuck. A genuine smile, the first of the day, touched my lips. Noted, I threw myself into work. The community center branding was flourishing. The concepts Liam and I had developed evolving into something truly special. I spent hours at my iMac, the lines and colors a welcome escape from the tangled lines of my own emotions. I practiced my guitar, the raw noise slowly, incrementally, beginning to resemble something with a structure, a rhythm. I was building. I was healing. Or so I told myself. A week later, the universe decided to test that theory. I was at a boutique grocery store, the kind with artisanal cheeses and kale chips that cost more than my first electric guitar. I was looking for a specific type of olive oil, my basket hooked over my arm, my mind blissfully occupied with the mundane. The store's sound system was playing a generic, inoffensive mix of indie folk, the kind of music that exists purely as auditory wallpaper. And then it changed. The first, haunting piano notes of To Build a Home by the Cinematic Orchestra sliced through the air. Our song, mine and Christopher's, the song we'd played for our first dance. The song he'd whispered the lyrics into my hair the night we decided to try for a baby. The song that had been the soundtrack to 1,000 moments of what I had believed was a profound, unshakable love. It was a visceral assault. The air left my lungs. The grocery store, with its bright lights and overpriced produce, dissolved. I was back in our condo, wrapped in his arms, his chin resting on my head, his voice a soft rumble in his chest as he sang along. I built a home for you, for me. The memory was a phantom limb, agonizingly present. The pain was so acute, so physical, it doubled me over, my hand flying to my stomach. The basket slipped from my arm, hitting the polished concrete floor with a clatter. A jar of honey rolled away under a shelf of organic pasta. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the store seemed to pulse, to close in. This was a different kind of panic attack, not the sharp, frantic terror of the restaurant, but a slow, drowning wave of grief. It was the grief for the dream, for the future I had pictured, for the man I thought he was. The betrayal was one pain. The death of the dream was another. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down my face. I leaned against a cold glass freezer door, the shock of it against my forehead the only thing anchoring me to the present. I was a ghost in the machine of everyday life, haunting the aisles of my own past. And then, a voice. His voice. Not a memory, but real here now. "Violet!" I froze. The world snapped back into a terrifying, high-definition focus. I slowly straightened up, wiping my cheeks with the back of my hand, and turned. Christopher stood at the end of the aisle, holding a basket of his own. He looked older, thinner. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually impeccable posture was slumped. He looked human, broken, and for a terrifying second, a treacherous part of my heart, the part that still remembered the first dance, twinged with pity. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant. The absurdity of the question, the sheer audacity of it, cut through the grief like a shard of glass. The song was still playing, building to its tragic crescendo. And it was bright and it was filled with light. "No, Christopher," I said, my voice a ragged whisper. "I am very clearly not okay." He took a step forward. "Vi, please, we need to talk. You just disappeared. You blocked my number." This isn't you. This is me." The words erupted from me, louder than I intended, drawing a glance from a woman selecting yogurt. "This is exactly who I am now. The woman you created when you decided to fuck your colleague while I was designing your presentations for free." He flinched, his face flushing. "Keep your voice down." "Or what?" I challenged, the rage now a welcome substitute for the suffocating grief. "You'll do what? Lie to me in a more quiet tone?" "Violet, it was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. It's over. It meant nothing." The oldest, lamest cliché in the cheater's handbook. It meant nothing, as if that made it better. As if reducing our entire shared history to something that could be invalidated by a meaningless act wasn't the ultimate betrayal. "It meant everything to me," I hissed, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "You didn't just break a vow. You broke the entire narrative of my life. You made me a fool in my own story." The song finally ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake, a silence filled only by the hum of the freezers and the ragged sound of my breathing. He looked at me, at my red hair, my tear-streaked face, my trembling body, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not remorse for my pain, but frustration. Frustration that I wasn't following the script, that I wasn't being the reasonable, accommodating Violet he could manipulate. "Who are you even now with this hair?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at my head, his tone laced with a disdain that was uniquely his. "This isn't you. This is some midlife crisis." And there it was, the final, desperate attempt to control the narrative, to define me, to tell me who I was and who I was allowed to be. I looked at him, this stranger I had built a home with for 11 years. I saw the petty frustration, the utter lack of true, soul-deep understanding. I compared it to the man who, just days ago, had sat with me in a panic attack and told me it was okay to be stuck in the doorway. The diamond of certainty in my gut, the one that had formed in the therapist's office, didn't just glow, it flashed, brilliant and final. I took a step towards him, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. "Don't you ever," I said, each word a shard of ice, "presume to tell me who I am. You lost that right. You lost me." I saw the words land, saw the shock in his eyes. He had expected tears, begging, maybe even a scene. He had not expected this cold, clean severance. I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on him. I left my basket on the floor, the spilled honey a sticky monument to our ruined past. I walked out of the grocery store, leaving him standing there among the artisanal cheeses and the ghost of our song. The Colorado sun hit my face. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the sharp, clean air, and I felt it. Not the fragile reinforcement of a bracket, but the solid, load-bearing strength of a foundation poured anew. He was a ghost, and I had just walked right through him. My phone buzzed. It was Liam. "Thinking of attempting a bookshelf this weekend. The instructions are even more terrifying. Feel like being my emergency consultant? I looked back at the grocery store doors, then down at my phone. The past and the future, presented in a single, defining moment. I typed my reply, my fingers steady and sure. Just try to build it without me. I was done being stuck in the doorway. It was time to walk through. The confrontation with Christopher in the grocery store had been a crucible. I had walked into the fire of my past and emerged, not unscathed, but tempered. The ghost had been laid to rest. The echo of our song no longer had the power to paralyze me. It was just a sad melody from a life that no longer belonged to me. The following weekend, I stood outside Liam's studio, a cardboard tray holding 2 steaming Americanos in my hands. The yes I had sent him felt like the most significant commitment I had made in years. It wasn't just about helping with a bookshelf. It was about consciously choosing to walk through the doorway he had so patiently held open. I knocked once and pushed the door open. The familiar scent of sawdust and coffee greeted me. Liam was in the middle of the room, surrounded by the carnage of what was supposed to become a Billy bookcase from IKEA. But this was different. Components from at least 3 other, more complex-looking kits were scattered around: extra shelves, decorative molding, a set of heavy-duty hinges. This was not an assembly. This was a modification, an architectural intervention. He looked up, a smudge of dust on his cheek, his hair even more gloriously chaotic than usual. His face broke into a wide, unreserved smile when he saw me. "You came. And you brought the good stuff." He took one of the coffees from the tray. "1 sugar, no cream?" "Hope it's still right," I said, a playful edge in my voice. "Some things," he said, his eyes holding mine, "once known are immutable facts. Like the load-bearing capacity of a steel beam, or how you take your coffee." My heart did that now familiar, delightful little flip. The air in the studio was thick with potential. "I see you're not just building a bookshelf," I observed, nodding at the organized chaos on the floor. "You're iterating on it." He grinned, a boyish, mischievous expression. "The Billy is a fine, democratic piece of furniture, but it lacks soul. I thought we could give it some. Add some internal framing for stability, some custom molding to hide the particle board edges, maybe even a secret compartment." "A secret compartment?" I raised an eyebrow, setting my coffee down on a workbench. "What are you, a spy?" "Every bookcase deserves a little mystery," he quipped, "and every person deserves a place to hide their treasures." We started to work. It was a replay of the HOPN dresser, but elevated. This wasn't about survival or repair. This was about creation for the sheer joy of it. He explained his modifications as we went, his passion for taking something ordinary and making it extraordinary infectious. I held pieces steady while he drilled. I sanded down the rough edges of the new molding until they were silky smooth. We debated the optimal height for the secret compartment. I won, arguing for a child height level, for a sense of wonder, which made him look at me with a soft, unreadable expression. The conversation was easy, flowing around the work. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his sister's kids and the epic pillow forts he built with them. I told him about my parents, both retired professors, and their annual, fiercely competitive Christmas puzzle tournament. We were slowly, carefully, stitching the patchwork of our lives together, one shared story, one laugh, one perfectly aligned screw at a time. At one point, reaching for a screwdriver, our hands brushed. It wasn't an accident, it was slow, deliberate. A quiet question. My breath hitched, but this time it wasn't from panic. It was from anticipation. I didn't pull away. I let my fingers rest against his for a heartbeat longer than necessary, feeling the warm, rough texture of his skin. The air in the studio seemed to still, the dust motes hanging motionless in the shafts of afternoon light. The unspoken thing was in the room with us now, no longer a specter but a presence. It was in the way our shoulders touched as we leaned over the plans. It was in the way he handed me tools, his focus entirely on me. It was in the comfortable silence that had settled between us, a silence that felt like a conversation in itself. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the studio, we put in the last screw. The bookshelf stood before us, transformed. It was sturdy, elegant, with clean lines and the subtle, beautiful molding that hid its humble origins. It was a piece of furniture with a story. Our story. Liam ran a hand over the top, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. "Not bad." "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. He turned to me, his expression turning serious. The playful architect was gone, replaced by the man who had sat with me in a restaurant during a panic attack. The man who remembered my coffee. "Violet," he said, his voice low and gentle. "The door." I knew what he was asking. He was checking the status of the doorway. He was ensuring, with a care that made my throat tight, that it was clear. I looked at him, at the sawdust in his hair, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet strength that had become my anchor. I thought of the ghost in the grocery store, now powerless. I thought of the red-haired woman in the mirror, who was no longer a stranger. I took a small step forward, closing the last bit of distance between us. I placed my hand on his chest, over his heart, feeling its steady, strong rhythm against my palm. "The door," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "is wide open." He didn't need another invitation. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking my cheeks. His touch was reverent, questioning. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to retreat. But I was done retreating. When his lips met mine, it was not a collision of desperation, but a gentle convergence. It was soft and warm and tasted of coffee and promise. It was the opposite of everything I had known with Christopher at the end. There was no performance, no hidden agenda, no lie. It was just truth. A simple, profound truth expressed in a kiss. It was a beginning. Not a frantic, passionate explosion, but a slow, steady ignition. A pilot light being lit after a long, cold winter. When we finally pulled apart, my forehead rested against his, our breaths mingling in the quiet space between us. I could feel the solid, reassuring beat of his heart under my hand, a rhythm I was starting to know as well as my own. He didn't say, "I love you." It was too soon for that. The words would have been a weight. Instead, he smiled, a slow, radiant smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "Well," he said, his voice husky, "that was better than the secret compartment." I laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed in the dusty studio. Much better. We stood there for a long time, in the wreckage of our successful project, holding on to each other. The bookshelf stood as a witness, a silent, sturdy testament to what happens when two broken things come together not to lean, but to build. We weren't just building furniture. We were building a new foundation. And for the first time, I knew, with a certainty that went deeper than any diamond of pain, that the blueprint was sound. The kiss in the studio didn't erase the past. It didn't magically seal the cracks in my foundation. But it did something more important. It gave me a reason to believe the cracks could hold something beautiful, something new. In the days that followed, a delicate new rhythm established itself between Liam and me. It was a rhythm of shared morning coffee texts, of late-night calls where we talked about nothing until one of us fell asleep, of him showing up at my door with a single, perfect peony because he'd walked past a flower shop and thought of the color of my lips. It was in the middle of one of these easy, quiet evenings at my apartment that the fear crept back in. We were on the couch, his arm around me, my head on his shoulder, watching a terrible movie we were both ruthlessly mocking. A comfortable silence had fallen during a commercial break, and my eyes drifted across the room to where my electric guitar stood propped in the corner, the cherry-red finish glowing in the lamplight. Liam followed my gaze. "Play for me," he said softly. It wasn't a demand, it was a request, an invitation, and it sent a jolt of pure terror through me. The guitar had been my private sanctuary, my soundproof room for grief and rage. The noise I made there was the unedited, unpretty soundtrack to my breakdown. Letting him into that space felt more vulnerable than any kiss, more intimate than any confession. It was handing him the raw, unsorted files of my pain. I can't," I stammered, pulling away slightly. It's not music, it's just noise." He shifted on the couch to face me, his expression serious. "I'm not asking for a concert, Violet, I'm asking to hear you. All of you." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the final fortress, the last door I kept locked even from myself most days. To open it for him was to risk him seeing the chaotic, wounded creature I still was at my core and deciding it was too much. But I looked into his blue-gray eyes and I saw no expectation of performance. I saw only a deep, patient curiosity, a desire to know the landscape of me, even the scorched earth. My hands were trembling as I stood up and walked to the guitar. I picked it up, the familiar weight both a comfort and a burden. I plugged it into the small amplifier, the cord feeling like a lifeline to a part of me I was about to sacrifice. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I stood there, my fingers resting on the fretboard, and I froze. What could I play? The chaotic, angry riffs felt too violent for this soft evening. The halting, simple chords I was learning felt too pathetic. And then, without my conscious mind directing them, my fingers found a different sequence. A slow, melancholic progression I'd been fumbling with in the deepest hours of the night. It was a melody that had woven itself out of my grief, a wordless song for the children I never had, for the home that was now ashes, for the woman I had to leave behind. I started to play. The notes were clean but hesitant. The rhythm was unsteady. It was a far cry from the roaring catharsis of my early sessions. This was quieter, sadder. This was the sound of the morning after the storm, surveying the damage. And then something broke open in my chest. The music began to flow, not from my fingers, but from a deeper well. The melody swelled, telling a story I had never spoken aloud. It spoke of empty nurseries and silent anniversaries. It spoke of the devastating kindness of a man who remembered my coffee. It spoke of the terrifying hope of a first kiss amid sawdust and blueprints. It was a song of endings and beginnings, all tangled together. I forgot he was there. I closed my eyes and let the guitar speak for my soul. I played until the final, resonating note hung in the air, a question mark of sound that slowly faded into a profound, listening silence. I opened my eyes, my breath caught in my throat, bracing for, I didn't know what. Polite applause, pity, confusion. Liam was still on the couch, but he was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the space between us, as if he could still see the notes hanging there. His face was a mask of intense, quiet concentration. And then, slowly, he lifted his gaze to mine. There were tears in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't clap. He simply stood up, crossed the room, and wrapped his arms around me, the guitar pressed between us. He held me so tightly I could feel the beat of his heart against my shoulder, a steady drum answering my tremulous melody. He buried his face in my neck, and I felt the warm, wet proof of his tears on my skin. His silence was the most profound response I could have ever imagined. He had not just heard the noise, he had listened to the silence within it. He had understood the story I hadn't known how to tell. When he finally pulled back, his hands came up to cradle my face, his thumbs wiping away the tears I hadn't even realized I was crying. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me with that." In that moment, the last brick of the wall around my heart crumbled to dust. He hadn't fled from the storm of my past. He had stood in the rain with me, and he had understood the language of the thunder. Later, as we lay tangled together in my bed, the guitar safely back in its corner, he traced idle patterns on my bare shoulder. "You know," he said, his voice a sleepy rumble, "that song, it's the heart of the community center. It's the feeling of a space that holds both joy and sorrow. That's what we're building." His words settled deep inside me, a final, perfect piece clicking into place. My pain, my art, my noise, it wasn't something to be hidden or ashamed of. It was the very material we were using to build something new, together. The silence in the apartment was no longer something to be feared. It was a shared space, a comfortable, breathing entity that had heard my song and had answered with the only response that mattered: presence. The move was not a dramatic, chaotic exodus. It was a careful, deliberate migration. Box by box, plant by plant, guitar pick by guitar pick, I transported my life from the sterile Lohi apartment to Liam's place. No, our place. He had insisted, not as an ultimatum, but as a logical, heartfelt progression. "My studio is here. Your studio is wherever you set up your iMac. It seems inefficient to maintain two separate fortresses when we're building the same castle." His place, a spacious, light-filled loft in a converted warehouse, was the perfect canvas. It had his architectural soul: exposed brick, high ceilings, massive windows that framed the Rocky Mountains, but it was waiting for a heartbeat. My heartbeat. Our first collaborative project became the loft itself. We weren't just moving me in, we were integrating our lives. The HOPEN dresser, that proud, crooked veteran of my early days of independence, was given a place of honor in our bedroom. My vibrant, abstract paintings now hung beside his precise architectural sketches. My collection of vintage teacups found a home next to his serious, professional coffee equipment. It was a mosaic of us, a physical manifestation of two separate stories weaving into one. One rainy Saturday, a month after I'd officially moved in, we decided to tackle the final frontier: the memory box. A single, sealed cardboard box I hadn't been able to open since leaving the condo. It contained the last vestiges of my life with Christopher, our wedding album, a few letters, the ultrasound photos from the first, hopeful round of IVF. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the box between us like a dormant beast. Liam sat opposite me, not reaching for it, just providing a steady, silent presence. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice small. "You don't have to," he said simply. "We can throw it out unopened. We can burn it, or we can leave it in the storage locker for another 10 years. It's your call, Violet. It's your past." I looked at him, at this man who had never once felt threatened by the ghost of my former life. His security was not fragile. He wasn't asking me to destroy the past. He was giving me permission to decide what to do with it. "I need to look," I said, more to myself than to him. "I need to know it doesn't have power over me anymore." With trembling hands, I sliced the tape. The first thing I saw was the white leather cover of our wedding album. I opened it. There we were, younger, softer, beaming with a naivety that felt like a punch to the gut. I expected the pain, the grief. But as I turned the pages, something else emerged. A strange, distant fondness. That girl in the photo, she was real, her joy was real. It wasn't invalidated by what came later. Liam didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He looked at the photos with me, his expression thoughtful. "You looked happy," he said, his tone neutral, observational. "I was," I whispered. "In that moment I was." I closed the album. It was a part of my history, a chapter. But it was no longer the definition of my story. I took out the small stack of ultrasound photos. The tiny, blurry beans that were the hope of a family. This pain was sharper, deeper. The loss of a dream that was never meant to be. Liam's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through mine. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held my hand, his grip solid and warm, anchoring me to the present, to the man who was here now. "I wanted that so much," I said, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. "I know," he murmured, "and that grief is yours to carry, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." He reached into the box and pulled out the last item. A small, velvet box. Inside was the pearl necklace Christopher had given me on our 5th anniversary. It was beautiful, and it felt like it belonged to someone else. "What do you want to do with it all?" Liam asked. I looked at the artifacts of my former life spread on the floor between us. The happy memories, the painful ones, they were all just things. They held the meaning I assigned to them. "I want to keep the album," I decided, my voice growing stronger. "As a reminder that I was capable of that kind of joy once. It means I can find it again." I picked up the ultrasound photos. "And these, I think I need to let these go." I looked at the pearl necklace. "And that can become something new." A slow smile spread across Liam's face. "I like that. Alchemy." We spent the afternoon on a project that was part exorcism, part creation. We didn't build a piece of IKEA furniture. We built a blanket fort. A ridiculous, magnificent, sprawling structure that took over the entire living room, using every sheet and blanket we owned, anchored by chairs and the steadfast HOPN dresser. We ordered pizza and ate it inside our makeshift castle, the rain pattering a soothing rhythm on the massive windows. Inside that soft, fabric-diffused light, surrounded by the comforting smell of cotton and pepperoni, we talked about the future. Not in vague, dreamy terms, but in concrete, hopeful ones. "The community center groundbreaking is next month," Liam said, his head in my lap as I traced the lines of his face. "I finished the final animation for the donor presentation," I replied, my heart swelling with pride for our shared creation. He was quiet for a moment, then he looked up at me, his blue-gray eyes serious in the dim light. "I was thinking about rooms. That second bedroom I use for storage. It gets the morning light. It would make a beautiful nursery." The air left my lungs. He wasn't just talking about a room. He was talking about a future I had dared not even whisper to myself. He was acknowledging my empty lot and suggesting we build something new on it. Together. Tears filled my eyes again, but they were tears of a hope so profound it was almost painful. "I'd like that," I managed to say. "I'd like that very much." He sat up and took my face in his hands. "We have time. We have all the time in the world. We'll build our family, Violet, however it comes to us. That room is a promise." That night, lying in the cocoon of our blanket fort, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath and the fading rain, I understood. My life was no longer a series of reactions, to betrayal, to grief, to fear. It was a collaboration. We had taken the blueprints of our separate, damaged pasts and were drafting something entirely new. The lines were clean, the foundation was solid, and for the first time, the central, most important room in the structure was no longer a chamber of grief, but a chamber of promise, filled with the quiet, unwavering certainty of a love that was built to last. The community center wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing entity, its heart beating in time with the neighborhood it served. On the day of its grand opening, the atrium, the communal hearth Liam had designed, was flooded with light and life. Children's laughter echoed off the curved walls, bouncing through the light wells that painted the concrete floor with shifting patterns of gold. The air hummed with the sound of conversation, music from a local quartet, and the profound, quiet satisfaction of a dream realized. I stood with Liam near the entrance, our hands loosely linked. I was wearing a dress the color of a summer sky, a bold departure from my uniform of black and gray. My red hair was now grown out into a softer, more intentional style, the roots my natural brown, a testament to a self that was no longer at war, but in a state of peaceful integration. Liam stood beside me, his hand a warm, familiar weight on the small of my back. He wore a simple, well-cut suit, but he'd foregone a tie, a small rebellion that was so perfectly him. We watched as people explored the space. A group of teenagers claimed the digital media lab I'd designed the graphics for. Elderly men set up a chess game in a sun-drenched corner. It was working, exactly as we'd envisioned. "You see," Liam murmured in my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "It holds both joy and sorrow, just like your song." Our song. The melody I had played for him in my darkest hour was now the unofficial soundtrack of this place of light. He had woven the feeling of it into the very fabric of the building. As we moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, I saw a familiar face. A little girl with Liam's same blue-gray eyes and a riot of dark curls was carefully arranging picture books in the children's library nook. It was his niece, Charlotte. She was 7, a whirlwind of curiosity and fierce opinions, and she had, over the past few months, carved a place for herself in the center of my heart. She saw us and came running, her small feet slapping against the polished concrete. "Uncle Liam, Auntie Vi," the books fit perfectly on the shelves. I organized them by the color of the spines. "It's more artistically pleasing." I laughed, crouching down to her level. "That's a brilliant system, Charlie, much better than alphabetical." She beamed, then her expression turned serious. "When are you coming to see the new room? Daddy helped me put the star stickers on the ceiling, but they don't glow in the dark. We got the wrong kind." Liam and I exchanged a look. The new room was the nursery-turned-bedroom in our loft. The promise made in a blanket fort was now a reality, filled with a small bed, a bookshelf overflowing with stories, and a frustratingly non-luminescent constellation on the ceiling. It was Charlie's room, for the weekends she stayed with us, for the holidays, for the moments when our family of 2 expanded to 3. "We'll be there tonight," Liam said, scooping her up. "And we'll get the right stickers this time. I promise." As he held his chattering niece, I felt a surge of love so powerful it stole my breath. This was it. This was the new, healthy family. It wasn't the picture I had painted in my mind all those years ago, the traditional family born from my own womb. It was messier, more unexpected, and infinitely more beautiful. It was built on choice, on shared scars, on a love that had been tested in fire and had emerged not just intact, but stronger. It was a family forged, not born. Later, as the opening event wound down, we found a quiet moment on a bench overlooking the central garden. The setting sun set the sky ablaze, painting the mountains in hues of violet and rose. I leaned my head against Liam's shoulder, the warmth of him a constant, reassuring presence. "It's strange," I said softly, gazing at the horizon. "I look back at the woman I was a year ago, sitting in that therapist's office, and I don't even recognize her. The pain was so absolute, it felt like the end of the world." "It was the end of a world," Liam said, his fingers lacing through mine, "but it was the beginning of a better one." He was right. Christopher's betrayal had been the demolition charge that brought my old life down. But from the rubble, I had salvaged the best parts of myself. My strength, my creativity, my capacity to love, and with Liam's steady hand, we had built a new life. A life with a hearth, not just a house. A life with a horizon, not just a view. I thought of the HOPN dresser, still standing proudly in our bedroom. I thought of the red guitar pick on my desk. I thought of the blueprint of the community center, framed and hanging in our hall, a permanent reminder of what we could create together. The grief for the children I never had would always be a part of me, a small, quiet stone in my pocket, but it no longer defined me. It had been joined by other, brighter stones, the joy of reading to Charlie, the peace of waking up next to Liam, the pride in work I loved, the simple, profound happiness of a shared life. I'm happy, I said, the words a simple, profound truth. Truly, deeply happy. Liam turned my face towards his and kissed me, there in the dying light of the day we had built together. It was a kiss of promise, of shared history, of a future that stretched out before us, as vast and as beautiful as the Colorado sky. The story that had begun with the scent of stale lavender and regret now ended with the smell of fresh-cut grass and infinite possibility. I was Violet, a graphic designer, a guitarist, a partner, an aunt. I was no longer the woman who had been left. I was the woman who had chosen to stay, and in staying, had found everything.